Hello, I'm Stephen Wynn. I'm here today to talk to the 4 leading candidates for mayor in San Francisco about the arts in the schools and how they can be nurtured and supported.
Well, as you know, the jurisdictions are different. The school district is, okay, everybody needs to understand that initially because you also can't interfere. On the other hand, a mayor who is a great advocate can do just about anything to improve a student's life in San Francisco. And the arts and sports are absolutely something that a mayor of San Francisco can do. Let me give you an example. When I was president of the Board of Supervisors, I took in front of my colleagues the issue of bifurcating a budget from the general fund budget, bifurcating a children's fund budget for preschool and after-school programs that were both sports and music, dance, theater. And to today, that children's budget exists. And I had to go to the ballot to get it passed. Because at the time, nobody wanted to do anything that involved children. I created the Youth Commission. I couldn't get that passed at the board, so I went to the ballot, and the citizens passed it with 78%. So these issues that concern the school issues, the school kids and the school issues, absolutely can be affected positively by a mayor. In fact, we, the government, the mayor's office, can create those programs outside of the curriculum. We could, give the school what it needs to do after school or before school, or for that matter, during their PE time. PE could be art versus sports, but definitely
finding ways that don't interfere with the unified,
curriculum,
their own curriculum, and their issues. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Let me circle back and ask about your experience. Did you have, when you were a kid growing up, did you have arts in the schools, and did you have experiences that were formative for you?
Well, certainly going to school in Florence didn't hurt. But since I was a little kid, my mother was an artist. My mother was literally a Renaissance artist, and she gave it up to be married and have 6 kids. But I was surrounded by her art. And of course, my father played the violin every night. And of course, we had to attend. It was mandatory attendance at the opera and the symphony and the ballet. So I met greats. I met Nureyev, I met Fontaine, and I have a funny story about that, but I'll tell you that off the record. And I will never forget ever. I was just a kid seeing Nureyev fly across the stage in one leap. I'll never forget it. It's like, unbelievable feeling. So I grew up in the arts. My mother was constant with the arts, and of course my father with the violin and opera. And there was one time I was in the hospital having one of my children, and my grandmother was in the room above me, but nobody wanted to tell me she was in the hospital because they didn't want me to get anxious. And I could hear her opera, because my grandfather Alioto knew every opera by heart. So my father came in one day and I said, it's the funniest thing. The person above me is listening to Mama Alioto's operas. And it was Mama Alioto.
That's a great story.
So I grew up with that. Yeah. Every Sunday was opera all day long.
We forget sometimes as adults that those things that we see as children, a certain thickness grows in us, but those things that happen, which is, I guess, why it's so important that kids have these experiences when they're young, because they, as you say, Nureyev jumps and he goes on jumping in your imagination for the rest of your life.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Stunning. I get goosebumps just thinking about that night to today, because it was such an athletic, graceful, I couldn't believe it. Yeah. But that brings up being able to give these kids that are in our school district the opportunity to see these things, to witness them. We have over 300 children in our school system that are homeless. That is a stunning statistic. That's unconscionable and not acceptable in a civilized society. That's something that needs to be dealt with immediately. They're sleeping in their cars, or they're sleeping in the streets with their mom or their dad, usually an unaccompanied single mother. And that's something that not only needs to be addressed, Steve, but is the easiest to take off the street. Easiest to take off the street, and yet we're not doing it.
The arts in the schools is extremely important. Arts, sports, all the different extracurricular activities that play a role in growth and development and a diverse curriculum. And as I said, if it weren't for band, and when I was in middle school, where it could be quite a challenging time in a child's life, I don't know what I would have done. And my teacher was incredible, and everybody loved Mr. Martins. He was the person, even when you misbehaved in other classes, everyone would asked Mr. Martins to talk to you, and you didn't want that conversation because the possibility of getting put out of band was there, so you didn't want to get put out of band, and so it really can help with disciplinary issues as well as getting kids inspired to participate in making music happen. I mean, we were playing scales the first time we learned to play scales. We worked independently, and then when we came together, and to be in that particular environment and make magic happen with a group of instruments in that way, that was like one of my first most amazing experiences as a child. Coming from an environment of drugs, of violence, of hopelessness, of frustration, here we had something that, you know, magic would happen. And the other thing was, you know, we would need to take our instruments home to rehearse. And I just couldn't believe that they were letting me take a French horn home because it was basically, it involved trust. I trust you to bring this instrument back. I trust you to practice and rehearse on your own to get better. So it's like all these different dynamics play a role in a child's life and their development and their growth and in their desire to be a part of something that sometimes, you know, is just a way in which they can get actively engaged in making some magic happen. And so I just think that, you know, we have to do a better job here in our city with making access to arts not only, you know, in our public schools, but also making sure there's a connection with larger institutions in San Francisco. Not just watching performances, but being a part of performances. When I was in band, we played at Davie Symphony Hall. And that was the first time I ever stepped foot in Davie Symphony Hall. I didn't even know what it was. But because of band, the opportunity exists.
It got you in that door.
Yeah, it got me in City Hall. We played for Mayor Dianne Feinstein. We were her band. She bought us band sweaters, and we thought we were just, you know, the cream of the crop. And it just does so much for a young person. And I just think that it's important that we continue to do a better job of opening those doors and the opportunities for young people to participate in the arts, not just in our public schools, but also in many of our nonprofit agencies all over the city that provide those opportunities.
All right. Studies show, as I'm sure you know, that the arts feeds performance in things like science and math and writing and other disciplines. Is that, again, something, given that it's not just arguing that the arts are a nice thing for students to have, a nice rounding thing, but are really central? Is that something that you as a mayor can drive that argument somewhat in terms of what the public schools can do, what we can do for kids with the arts in the city? You
know, what I notice in working with kids at an arts organization is just sometimes there are children who are just artists. That's just what they are. That's just who they are. I grew up with a guy named Robert Henry Johnson. Robert has always been a dancer my whole life. He walks like a dancer. He looks like a dancer. He's a dancer.
You know it when you were kids together, huh?
Yes. Yeah. You just know it. It's just the way that he walks and the way that he moves, and he is not only an incredible dancer, he's an incredible choreographer, he writes plays, he's inspirational, and that's just naturally who he has always been. And I think part of, you know, what's important for someone who's mayor or who's a leader of the city is to understand the role that everyone plays in making San Francisco a better place. Sometimes, you know, that is who people are, and we have to make sure we nurture that, we support that, we encourage that. And I think that that's really what I bring to the table, just understanding that as someone who's worked in the arts community for so very long, just the ability to identify certain people or certain things that are necessary for just enhancing what already, you know, enhancing the arts in San Francisco. I mean, I will continue to make sure that I'm a major supporter, no matter whether I'm mayor or anything else in San Francisco, because it's just something that I absolutely love. I love the fact that we have performances in City Hall, random performances on Fridays with dancers and folks, and you know, they don't just show up and dance, they rehearse, they take time. This is what they do. And again, I truly believe artists should be paid for the work that they do. It is just like someone's being paid to be an HR person or anything else in life. I truly believe that all of these things, you know, play a vital role in the diversity and the success of San Francisco. Not just something you see on the side, but something that needs to be naturally embedded in the fabric of San Francisco.
So I visit New Orleans on a regular basis, partially to visit the Jazz Festival every year and for other events. And I'm always struck when I go to New Orleans a city actually that has a very poorly funded public education system. But you're out on the streets and you meet all these high school students and they all play instruments. And in fact, they regularly play in marching bands. And it's extraordinary actually to see so many students that know how to play instruments, largely brass instruments. And I think a lot about how we can replicate that here in San Francisco. I agree that arts education isn't just an elective. It's an integral part of a comprehensive education about what allows us to be a well-rounded citizen. And in many ways, it's arts and athletics and other quote-unquote electives that drive students to succeed in school and to come to school and enjoy their education. But there is also a link between arts and math and reading and science. And one challenge I think we have in the education world is getting kids and students excited to learn if they don't understand how to apply it. And so if you learn how algebra and calculus applies to architecture and design and music, then it's exciting for kids because they know how they're going to use it later in life. And I think often what we hear from students is that, oh, this isn't relevant. I'm never going to use this. So connecting it to the arts, I think, is an integral way that we can bring these other subjects to life. So
encouraging curriculum that really does that sort of integrates and makes the arts an integral part of what's going on in the schools, in the classroom.
I think it's incredibly short-sighted and narrow-minded to not think of education in a more comprehensive way. Education is far more than reading and math. And for us to, I think, have a great society and a great community, arts has to be an integral part of that education.
And you as mayor how would you try to drive those issues as mayor in terms of making these things a reality?
So I'm the only elected that actually served on the Board of Education, and I understand the distinct roles between SFUSD and the City and County of San Francisco. And they drive the curriculum expertise and the policies and the programs. But where the city can come in is to fund a lot of the needed funding for where the state of California has failed us. And so we can come in and fund wraparound services for nurses and social workers and counselors who are desperately needed in our schools. But we can also fund many of the things that our school district has felt it has needed to cut because we as the state of California has divested from funding public education, and that includes the arts. And we can deepen and make more meaningful existing relationships between our public schools, the Symphony, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, and Bindle Stiff, and the opera, and the ballet. These are all institutions with incredible artists that we should be connecting directly to our students.
You've talked about the way that your own performance history and the music that you love and the art that you go and see has really served your team at work. Do you think that it's important to make the case in schools that arts funding isn't just about the arts, but that it really does connect integrally to other disciplines and really serves the whole student in the way that the arts serve the whole city, as we've been talking about?
I think what sometimes is difficult for students in regular classes is not understanding how to apply it. So it's great to learn algebra and calculus, but if you don't understand what it means in the real world, then you're not going to be as motivated to learn it. But when you connect it to music, for example, or sculptural design, or architecture, then math comes to life. And so it absolutely is applied education. And if we can excite and invigorate young people to learn the basics through the arts, then I think that that's ultimately a very profound way to educate young people. But I do think the arts is an essential part of education. We don't test it, right? But I do think that it is a part of our education, and I'm so glad that I was able to have arts education growing up.
Are there things that you could do as the mayor to really drive that in the public schools?
I think one is funding. So I often hear from our schools that, public education system, we fund the basics, right? The city can come in and support the wraparound services and the elective programming. And we can develop deeper partnerships and more meaningful partnerships with our existing arts institutions here in San Francisco. We're so lucky to live in the city with the ballet and the symphony and Bindle Stiff and Intersection for the Arts and Yerba Buena Center for the Arts and the SF MoMA and DeYoung Museum. And we should absolutely deepen those relationships to create more seamless partnerships with our schools, and our arts institutions, and the city should fund that. And we should be ensuring that we are, again, making up for where the state has failed us in terms of funding arts education in our schools.
So I can tell you from every report, every analysis, everything that I've ever read on the subject, students that study art and music test better not only in reading and math, but in science. They have higher rates of self-esteem, no surprise. They have lower rates of dropping out of school. And here again, connecting dots, a student who doesn't complete high school and get a degree has a 7 times greater likelihood of finding his or her way into our criminal justice system. So when we're talking about education, encouraging and inspiring students to stay in school and to get a high school diploma, if not pursuing higher education or a career technical education, we're also providing safer communities and lowering the growth rate of our Department of Corrections, which is the fastest growing department in state government. So again, connecting these dots and recognizing that we know what works. We don't need another study. We don't need another analysis. We know. And sometimes we don't even pay attention to the evidence-based information in front of us. So it makes sense on so many levels to make sure we invest in art and music education. And that's something I pursued for all of my years in the legislature. My very first year as an assemblyman in 2003, again, dealing with an ongoing budget crisis and recognizing that the Arts Council had been decimated, I thought the arts needs a new and dedicated revenue source to sustain it so that it will not be held hostage through the vagaries of our annual budget process. So I remembered that when I was on the Board of Supervisors, I think it was Supervisor Mabel Tang was able to successfully add a very small little surcharge onto the cost of a Giants and 49ers sports ticket. You wouldn't even know it was on, and you don't know it's on, but it is. And that went to physical education for students in our public schools. I thought, well, why don't we do that for the arts? Let's put a 1% surcharge on every entertainment ticket sold in California. So in the states, the legislation, a $10 movie ticket would cost an extra $1. A dime, excuse me, a dime, as you go into the theater to spend $20 on Coca-Cola and popcorn, a dime. A $100 opera ticket would cost an extra $1. And we extrapolated that we could raise about $40 million for the California Arts Council each year.
Just the amount that had been cut.
Yes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that did not make it out of committee.
Yeah.
And my colleagues, we would need a 2/3 majority vote to create a new tax. This is not increasing a tax, it was creating a new tax. That's always a difficult thing to do, but I'm still convinced that's a very wise thing to do. And I should check, and I will be, with the city attorney, if Mabel could do that for physical education at the local level, I'm not clear why we needed a change in state law to do it for art education. But it would make sense.
Yeah. It's on several points now you've been really arguing sort of the economic model about why the arts are, we understand the arts are important in a sort of psychological, emotional, it enriches our life.
Yes.
But it's really important to argue along some of the lines that you are, that it makes sense economically, it keeps kids out of prison, it costs us less money, they perform better in school,
yes.
All of these kind of things, and same with the funding more broadly. It's an engine of growth for us.
I worked with then Attorney General Kamala Harris when I was still in the state Senate. She was focusing on truancy and chronic absenteeism. There are children in San Francisco and throughout California who are missing upwards of 1/3 of their school year as early as 1st and 2nd grade. And when a child's missing that much school, they're falling so far behind. They're never going to be reading at grade level in grade 3 when they get tested, or 5th grade or 8th grade. They're never going to catch up, never. And then, of course, the likelihood that they drop out is so great, and they'll not get that high school diploma, and they will be 7 times more likely to enter into our criminal justice system. To think that an 8-year-old kid's future is being engraved in stone is just heartbreaking. And so we worked together on some legislation to deal with some of the real challenges and factors that keep some kids from less advantaged communities from just getting to school. And she shared with me a statistic that I've never forgotten, that in 2012, in San Francisco, 92% of homicide victims, not perpetrators, victims under 25 were without a high school diploma. So without a high school diploma, you are either going to be you'll be engaged in violent crime one way or the other, either as the assailant or as the victim. That's 92%. 80% of those in our state prison are without a high school diploma.
Getting down to the granular level here, what can the mayor do, what can the mayor's office do about arts education in San Francisco?
So he or she can call the city attorney and say, do we need to change in state law to put a 1% surcharge on every entertainment ticket? So I had to work with some of the local arts organizations in my district as I was proposing that, because you can be sure I got some calls from my friends at the ballet and the symphony and the opera saying, you want to do what? And of course, it was the movie theater owners that really killed that. They just said, this is going to destroy us. But I got more resistance from the larger arts organizations than I did from the community-based organizations. They said, yeah, it makes sense. They thought it was going to be an inhibitor on their... They thought that it would discourage ticket sales, subscriptions, if there was a 1% surcharge. I doubt that. Or that they would have to eat the increase and it would come out of their own budget. No one likes change and no one likes a tax being thrown at them in one way or the other. So it took a lot of time and energy, but I got most everyone to at least a neutral spot. But it was the community-based organizations that understood the benefit, and I got no resistance there. So is this something you might pursue and really try to? Oh, yes, without a doubt. And I should have the answer to that question after all this time, but I don't. Yeah. But I do remember that it was inspired by something we did locally on athletic entertainment. Yeah. In terms of playing a direct role, I mean, San Francisco Unified School District has its own domain and purview over curriculum and things like that. But again, are there things that the city can do, after-school programs or other kinds of things that can enrich and enhance and surround what Unified does? Are there things that the specific kind of programs or projects, in addition to tax revenue? Sure, without a doubt. I don't know that there is a lot of synergy between the school district and some of the arts organizations that are already engaged in the exposure of art and music to our students in the school system. The Symphony has its Adventures in Music program, the AIM program, where I think they visit every school, middle school in the district, and the musicians from the Symphony bring their instruments, and the students get to put their hands on them, and if they're horns, they get to blow something. If it's a string, they get to touch something. It's real. And then they get to hear, and the percussionists, and it gets kids' attention. Of course, when we went to school, we all started with the recorders in kindergarten, and then there was the school band, and we were privileged kids in public schools, and that's just not that way today. So and then there's Music in Schools Today, which is another nonprofit organization which does similar kinds of work. So I would imagine if there is some interaction and synergy, that it certainly could be enhanced. And I would be, so much of these public offices is just plain facilitator. Yeah. Oh, you got a need, you got an idea. Let's bring everyone together and make this happen. What about some public-private partnerships, other ways to leverage those things to make it? Certainly. And we've got booming new industries in this city, and they need to recognize that there's benefit for them to engage. And I know some of this directly from, again, Michael Thomas and his ongoing efforts to engage newcomers to San Francisco and new industries to San Francisco and new donors to the Symphony, because the old guard dies off, and the inheritors of those fortunes may not have the sensitivity of the arts that their parents had. So he's, as a music director, always looking for funding for his organization. It's a big organization. And so there's a lot of opportunity out there. So much wealth in this city right now. Well, yeah. And I don't think enough of it is currently directed at the arts and so many other of the needs in San Francisco.
Well, it's what a frustration that people say all the time. There's so much money here. How can we not be addressing, all of the
Right.
the myriad of
Yes.
issues, income?
And let's
quality,
also
and
recognize the
all
heroes that we do have in our midst, like Mark Benioff, just extraordinary.
Right.
And he's trying to lead by example. And I don't know how many of his colleagues are following, but it doesn't stop him.
Well, you talked about showing up earlier on. A lot of it is that, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.